Good evening and welcome to the Fall 2025 Frontiers of Cosmology lecture. This is the first lecture in our second year of this series. This will be the fifth lecture we've put together. This started in 2024 inside the Physics and Astronomy department, and it grew into a new initiative that is being led by Professor Barish. Professor Barish is the 2017 Nobel Laureate in Physics. He was one of the original builders of the LIGO scientific collaboration, one of the largest experiments in the world that in 2015 made the first detection of gravitational waves from two distant colliding black holes. This confirmed almost 100 years to the day a fundamental prediction of Einstein's equations of general relativity. And Professor Barish has come to UC Riverside now, and he is leading an effort to develop a new experimental initiative to develop new enabling next-generation technologies for every type of astronomical messenger. So that's particles, neutrinos, dark matter, gravitational waves, and electromagnetic radiation. And this intellectual endeavor has grown into an integration of some of the existing strengths of UC Riverside, the high energy nuclear physics groups within the physics department, the astronomy and particle theory physics wing of the department, and also the material science and engineering strength of UC Riverside. And so we envision this new center being at the nexus. So there's a grand vision for actually building the visibility of this center and actually promoting it. And so these lectures are a key part of that initiative. And so there's a long-term vision to actually develop new frontier lab facilities, ultimately a new quantum information sciences building, as well as to create new research opportunities for students at every level, from undergraduate fellowships all the way through endowed postdoc positions. So we would like to begin tonight's event by thanking our friends and supporters who have made this new CESI Center's efforts so far possible. And we ask that if you're able, we're very much in a fundraising phase right now to get this new initiative off the ground here in Riverside. And so if you're so inclined, we have a QR code and a link here, and we would appreciate any donations, no matter how small. They directly go to supporting events like this, as well as supporting cutting-edge research opportunities for our students. So with that, I would like to introduce UC Riverside's new Chancellor, who has been here just under 3 months, Chancellor Jack Hu. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I can't see anyone. So it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you to tonight's lecture on one of the universe's most powerful and fascinating events, the supernova. And supernova marks the end of a star's life, but it also creates the elements that makes life possible. You remind us that even ending can lead to new beginnings. Here at UC Riverside, the Center for Experimental Cosmology and Instrumentation, CECI, is bringing that sense of discovery to our region. Through its research and technology development, the center explores questions as vast as the origin of the universe and as practical as the innovations that shape our future. Supernovas are not just beautiful to observe, they are where elements like gold, silver, and oxygen are formed. At the Center for Experimental Cosmology and Instrumentation, the drive to understand those events also sparks new innovation. The same tools used to understand the universe, to study distant stars, advanced imaging, precise instrumentation, and data systems can be applied to problems here on Earth. This reinforces UC Riverside's role as a place of basic scientific discovery, but collaboration for innovation. It helps us attract outstanding faculty, students, and partners like those, and also bring distinguished speakers from around the world, like our speaker today. Those events help build a reputation for the University of California, Riverside, for our excellence in science and technology across Southern California. CECI is also preparing the next generation of scientists and engineers. To the students in the audience tonight, whether you're going to work in universities or in private industry after graduation, we hope you will carry the spirit of innovation learned here with you. You are the future of our region and the world's scientific leadership in the future. In those ways, CECI's work reaches from the depth of space to the heart of our own community and our economy. Thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. Your presence, whether you are faculty, staff, or students, or community members, reflects a shared belief in the power of knowledge, discovery, and science to serve the public good. Through centers like CECI, we ask the universe's biggest question and turn those answers into innovation and impact to all. Thanks again for being here.
So welcome, I'm Peter Atkinson, and the Chancellor's quite right, I can't see anyone. Welcome to this fantastic seminar. I'm going to introduce Distinguished Professor Barry Barish, who'll be introducing our guest speaker. Distinguished Professor Barry Barish was born in Omaha, Nebraska. His parents moved to Los Angeles some years later. Barry studied for both his bachelor's and PhD degree at the Department of Physics at the University of California in Berkeley, where he graduated with his degree in 1962. The following year, he joined the faculty in the Division of Physics at the California Institute of Technology, where in 1991 he became the Lind Professor of Physics. He joined the UCR Physics Department as a Distinguished Professor of Physics in 2018 and has been instrumental in helping to establish the UCR Center for Experimental Cosmology and Instrumentation, which you have already heard about. And as Professor Richardson said, it's about instrumentation which enables one to do measurements on those elusive particles and forces that are the very core of nature as we know it. Barry Barish's research spans several pivotal areas of physics. He started his career in high-energy physics, performing experiments at national particle accelerators throughout the country, and commencing in 1994 as principal investigator and director, he orchestrated the construction and commissioning of LIGOs interferometers, leading to the historic detection of gravitational waves originating from the collision of two black holes some 1.3 billion light years ago, thereby validating Einstein's predictions and revolutionizing astrophysics. Distinguished Professor Barry Barish is a pioneer in both particle physics and gravitational wave astronomy and is renowned as a science educator. He is the recipient of numerous national and international awards and memberships in learned societies and academies. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2017 for the discovery of gravitational waves. In 2023, he was awarded the Copernicus Prize by the Polish government for exceptional contributions to the development of world science. That's what the award is given for, world science. Also in 2023, he was awarded the National Medal of Science by President Biden, The final sentence of this award states, and I quote, "He has broadened our understanding of the universe and our nation's sense of wonder and discovery through science." And it continues. Please join me in welcoming Distinguished Professor Barry Barish.
Well, I'm very pleased today to be able to introduce an ex-student of mine. So Kate Scholberg, who entitled her talk today, "How to See a Star Explode from Underground," didn't want to chase you away. This lecture is about what we call neutrinos. And you'll hear a lot about it, but realize that if you hold your hand up, there's 10 trillion neutrinos going through your hand every second. So maybe you don't know very much about neutrinos, but they're everywhere. And they're important in everything from how the universe began to how everything dies, what we call the weak interaction, radioactive decay. She's going to tell you about a particular aspect of how neutrinos can tell us how stars explode and how they're done technically by going deep underground. Kate was, as I mentioned, was a graduate student, got her PhD at Caltech from supervision of a good colleague of mine, Charlie Peck, and myself. And she did her thesis on an experiment that was done 6,800 feet underground in Italy called the macro experiment. And in that experiment, she got the idea early that what she was interested in had to do with neutrinos and neutrinos underground. Neutrinos, as I said, are not only prevalent, they actually are really important for us understanding physics. There's 3 different Nobel Prizes, 3 different times given for neutrinos. One, when it was discovered. A second one was when a monumental experiment was done that showed that there's not just one kind of neutrino, but at that time 2 different ones that are distinguished from each other. And lastly, it was given for solving a big puzzle, which is that nuclear physicists had taught us how the sun burns. And we thought that was right. It came from theoretical physics. But we developed the capacity to actually see those neutrinos coming from the sun here on the ground. But the number that we're seeing was 1/3 of the number that we expected from the sun. What was understood was that neutrinos actually can change their identity as they go from the sun to us, and there are 3 different kinds, so we only saw 1/3 of the ones that originated at the sun. Kate has worked in this whole field for her whole career so far, beginning underground at the macro experiment in Italy. And then she worked in Japan on this big detector that actually has done these monumental neutrino oscillation experiments, the neutrinos changing their identity, and which also led to the 3rd Nobel Prize that I talked about. And she's an expert at all aspects of neutrino physics. She's worked on what's called T to 2K. That's starting at a particle accelerator in Japan and letting the neutrinos cross almost the length of Japan, or 2/3 of the length of Japan, and then seeing what arrives. Did the same neutrinos arrive or different neutrinos? And she'll tell you about this. And as I say, neutrinos are so prevalent, but we know very little about them, and we're still learning. And she's one of the most renowned people now studying neutrinos. So I'll give it to Kate to tell you all about the most fascinating particle we have, which is a neutrino.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, and it's really my great honor and pleasure to be here to tell you about science that I'm very excited about, and also which in several places touches research that is being done here at UCR and in the context of CESI, so I'll try to point that out when I come to it. And yeah, I'm going to tell you how we can use neutrinos to see what's happening when a star explodes from our perch underground, if you can call it a perch, looking at the neutrinos. So first, let me talk about neutrinos. So neutrinos are ghostly particles. As Barry said, there are trillions of them going through your hand, even just your hand, your whole body, all the time. And that's, they just go right through things. That's why they're often called ghostly. And we study them actually for many reasons, and one of them is really just for the fundamental physics reasons, the kind of things you already heard about in the introduction. This is what CESI is going after, and generally research into particle physics and cosmology, is we're trying to understand the nature of energy, matter, and space and time on both very, very small scales and very, very large scales. We're trying to understand what are the fundamental particles that make up the universe, how do these particles interact with each other, and how did the universe come to be the way it is? So those are the big questions. And in our current best picture, on the particle side, we have what's called the Standard Model, which is a framework that is really a very good description of many of the phenomena that we see. It's actually not everything, but many of them. And in this picture, we have matter that's made up of quarks, which make up protons and neutrons. And then we have leptons. And the electron, for example, is a familiar thing. We've also got particles like the Higgs boson, which you may have heard about. And so these quarks, most of these cupcakes here, these are the cupcakes representing the Standard Model particles, the ones that make up the matter that you see in this room that you're very familiar with, the protons and neutrons are made up of quarks. The electrons that you've heard about are just this tiny part of the cupcake table. And we have all these other particles as well. We also we learn about these particles with, for example, accelerators and so on. There's many experiments. But these neutrinos here that are part of the picture have very strange properties with respect to some of these other ones. They actually are very strange in various ways, and one of the ways that they're strange is that they are extremely light. We know now that they have mass. I'm not going to go into the details of that story, but it's because we know that they change their type or their flavor that we actually know they have mass. And what we know now is that their mass it's not zero, it's not a massless particle, but it is very, very tiny mass. And this is just a ratio. If an electron, and electrons, of course, are very light particles that are part of atoms. If an electron is an elephant, a neutrino is smaller than a mouse in terms of its mass. So this is really very, very small. And why the masses are so small is something that we don't really understand. We also know now that of the fundamental particles, or the fundamental forces that we know about, so gravitational force, that's one everybody's familiar with. Electromagnetic force is also something you're probably familiar with. The strong force is what holds the quarks together in nuclei, and the weak force is responsible for nuclear decay. And of these forces in the Standard Model, these three in the Standard Models, the neutrinos interact via the weak force. So they interact only very weakly, which means that they interact only rarely. And just to give you a sense of how weak the weak force is, a gamma ray is a photon. It's a high-energy photon, and it's a famously penetrating photon. A gamma ray can get through a lot of material. Some radioactive particles will get stopped by even small amounts of matter, but a gamma ray will go pretty far. And something like 20 centimeters of carbon, a big chunk of matter. A neutrino with that same energy as a photon that goes through 20 centimeters of carbon can actually travel about a light year before it is likely to bump into anything. So neutrinos will this is why they're called ghostly particles, is they interact only very rarely, very weakly, and so they almost don't bump into anything, and they just slip right through matter, and they just go right through things, which of course is that's also very strange. And just to give you another example here, a neutrino could travel through something like 100,000 Earths before it would ever bump into anything, before it would ever interact with anything via the weak force. And, you might think that's a little bit creepy, but, that's actually part of our world. And you can ask the question, well, if neutrinos are so weakly interacting, they just slip right through matter, almost never bump into anything, how do we know that they exist? And actually, that's an interesting question. How do you actually detect them? And if this probably dates me, but this is Star Trek The Next Generation. There's a character called Geordi LaForge who had a visor that let him see neutrinos. And I've always been very jealous of this visor. This would be really great. Unfortunately, we don't have those kind of visors. The way you can actually see a neutrino is that when it does occasionally decide to bump into something, it will create ordinary particles. It will create particles that interact via the electromagnetic and strong force, and that you can detect in a normal way that you would detect any normal particle. So they do occasionally interact to make charged particles that we can detect and measure. But because they interact so rarely, you either need to have lots and lots of neutrinos, and actually we do have lots and lots of neutrinos, or you have to have a really, really big detector to have any hope of intersecting any of those huge number of neutrinos. Even assuming you have lots of them, you still have to make detectors that can be extremely large, and some of the detectors Barry mentioned, some of them are kiloton scale or even tens of kiloton scale. And actually, I'll talk about future ones that are going to be even bigger than that. So you need huge detectors because the interactions are so rare, because the neutrinos tend to just slip through things, and if you want to catch even a few of them, you need to make your detectors very big. And not only that, if you put your hand out here, you have about 1 cosmic ray muon going through it every second. There's particles coming from space that are called cosmic rays that come from outer space, creating actually more particles in the atmosphere. And those particles are going through everything right now. You don't see them. It's fewer of them than neutrinos, and they actually do interact at some level, but it's lots of them. And so if you put your gigantic detector on the surface, trying to see occasional interactions of neutrinos, it's going to be on the surface of the Earth. It's going to be swamped with this constant rain of cosmic rays. They're just going to completely blind you. It's like trying to see one tiny raindrop in a giant rainstorm. You'll never see it if you have your giant detector on the surface. And so for that reason, that's why we go underground. It's in order to shield the cosmic rays. If you go deep underground, the cosmic rays that are coming from space, particles from space, are going to just eventually get shielded out. They're going to stop in the rock above your head, and it's going to be nice and quiet, and you're going to be able to see even a very few rare interactions of neutrinos. And so that's why we're underground. That's in general why we want to build our detectors underground. It's to get away from the cosmic rays, which are like a constant noise that is swamping the occasional interaction of the neutrino. Okay, so that's basics on neutrinos. Now I want to talk about supernovae, which are amazing things, celestial events. So what's a supernova? A supernova is a gigantic explosion that completely blows up a star, that basically destroys a star, completely blows it to smithereens. And for a while, a supernova can be as luminous, it can be as bright in light, in photons, as an entire galaxy. So this is just one star, when it blows up, can be as bright as an entire galaxy. And I was actually once taken to task by a famous astronomer who told me, well, not a big galaxy, a small galaxy. But still, that's pretty bright. Being as bright as a small galaxy is pretty bright. And there are different kinds of supernovae, and this is a tweet that I thought was pretty funny, if astronomers were in charge of naming them, pies would be known as type 2 cakes. So there are different kinds of supernova, and astronomers are in charge of naming supernovae. And they are classified by the wavelengths of photons, basically the kinds of photons that they emit, and also how the light changes with time. And there are these two types. They're both very, very bright. They emit enormous amounts of light. But there's one kind that is actually a giant thermonuclear explosion. And this is called the type 1 supernova, actually strictly type 1a. And actually, this is quite important for cosmology because it is a a consistent brightness, and it's actually useful for being a standard candle, basically, so you can know how far away the supernova is because you know how much light it emits. But that's another story. What I'm actually going to talk to you about here is the so-called type 2 supernovae, and these, what is happening behind them is a completely different physical mechanism from this. This is a thermonuclear explosion. This one is a star that is dying. So this is a star, a very massive star at the end of its life, when it can no longer hold itself up against its own gravity by the heat coming from the fusion reactions that it's burning with, will fall in on itself and collapse. And this kind of event at the end of a star's life, at the end of a massive star's life, will create a compact remnant, a neutron star or a black hole. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a little bit. So here, this is what I want to talk about, is the type 2 supernova, the gravitational collapse. So this is kind of the story of the life of a star, where you have a star, a massive star. It has to be about 8 times the mass of the sun for this kind of story to unfold. Is you have a star that's burning, it's burning elements, okay? It's basically generating, the way the sun burns is it is fusing protons to create heavier elements, and once those protons have fused to create helium, you can get further stages that make heavier and heavier elements. And in our picture of how stars evolve through their lifetimes as they start burning heavier and heavier elements that get squeezed together to make yet heavier ones, until you get to a point where you have a core that is mostly made of iron, and iron is kind of like an ash. It can't burn anymore. If you try to add more elements to it, it doesn't burn. And once this core has built up and it gets heavy enough, it can no longer hold itself up against its own gravity, and it will collapse. And this happens extremely rapidly. The star squeezes down, and it gets to a nuclear density such that it can't squeeze anymore, and it bounces back, and that bounce creates a gigantic explosion. So that's where these luminous supernovae come from. It comes from the explosion after the collapse and the rebound. Now this process produces not only a compact remnant, which I'll say a tiny bit more about in a bit, these are very interesting objects, but in this process, this very rapid collapse and rebound, there are enormous numbers of neutrinos produced, and I'm going to try to explain why. And just a little bit here about a neutron star. What results from that collapse is that the electrons and the protons in the atoms are under so much pressure that they're actually squeezed together to make neutrons. So an electron and a proton will squeeze together. It will make a neutron, a neutral part, kind of like a neutral proton, and that actually emits neutrinos, and it also makes neutrons. And so you end up with a star that is made extremely dense and made entirely of neutrons. And these are amazing objects. This is, of course, not a photograph. This is a visualization of the size of a neutron star. You have an entire star like the sun that is squeezed, actually possibly bigger than the sun, that is squeezed to about a 10-kilometer size, so the size of a city. So imagine the entire mass of the sun squeezed into this neutron star nearby a city. So these are extremely dense, extremely exotic matter. And what can happen subsequently, also, if there's enough matter in the neutron star, there can be a subsequent collapse that the neutron star can't actually even hold itself up against its own gravity, and there can be a collapse into a black hole, which is an object which is so dense that light cannot even escape from it. So these are maybe even more exciting, interesting objects. And this process, the formation of a neutron star and then subsequently a black hole, if that happens, it may not always happen. In fact, we know it doesn't always happen. But this whole process, it actually only takes about 10 seconds. It's very fast. And it is accompanied by an enormous burst of neutrinos, this brilliant burst of neutrinos, in fact, even 100 times greater than the luminosity in photons. And I can also mention, I just want to highlight a connection with CESI here and a focus of research here at UCR, and of course, Bari's work, is it's possible also to see the effects of this really cataclysmic collapse an explosion potentially in the form of gravitational waves, basically ripples in space-time that are possibly observable via gravitational wave detectors. And so that's one of the messengers of the collapse that may result from a supernova. Now, the neutrinos, let's go back to the neutrinos. So in astrophysics, the fact that neutrinos just slide through things that don't interact much, they don't interact much at all, this weakness of the interaction, it's actually both a blessing and a curse. And so the reason it's a blessing is that because the neutrinos can just get out, they don't interact with the material, they just zoom right away from the supernova, they can give you information. If you can measure them, if you can detect them, you can see what's going on from very deep inside very dense exotic objects. And those are places where photons, because photons interact a lot with matter by electromagnetic interactions, photons tend to get trapped. And so you can't see what's going on inside a core collapse, inside a star, because the photons can never get out. There's all this matter outside, and which is opaque to the photons, and you'll never see those photons. You can't see, but you can see what's going on from the neutrinos, because the neutrinos are coming out and bringing you information. Now, the flip side is, the curse part is that neutrinos require enormous detectors and very quiet locations underground to actually see anything. And so this is the hard part, is if you want to see these neutrinos where you're getting really valuable information, you have to really make heroic efforts to build detectors that can see them. Now, I want to try to outline why it is that neutrinos escape, or why it is that most of the energy, almost all the energy of that collapse turns into neutrinos. It's extremely bright in photons, it's 100 times brighter in neutrinos. And the reason for that, just in outline, is that gravitational energy, and actually if you've taken any physics at all, even in high school, you know about energy conservation. Energy is never created or destroyed. There's gravitational potential energy. If you drop something, the gravitational energy of that object turns into kinetic energy when the object falls. So if you drop a piano, the energy is conserved. It turns into the speed of the energy related to the speed of the piano. It turns eventually, when it hits the ground, it turns into noise and heat and all kinds of things like that. So energy is always conserved. And this, of course, happens with a star. When the star falls in on itself, its gravitational energy is conserved. It has to go somewhere. And because that energy can escape, because the neutrinos can take away that energy because of the weakness of the neutrino interaction with matter, then that means that they do. Because they can make off with all the star's gravitational energy, then they do escape, and they take it all away, and almost all of that energy is gone in the form of the neutrinos. It goes out into the universe in the form of neutrinos. So it's a really bright burst, enormous amount of energy of neutrinos that is shed within about 10 seconds. And so this is really why you get these really bright neutrino bursts. It's because the neutrinos can make off with the energy, because they can slide right through the matter. And the whole process of what happens in the core collapse after the neutrinos escape and during the time they're escaping is actually a very complicated problem. There's actually been a lot of progress in recent years using supercomputer studies. And so these are just some visualizations of the resulting explosion after a core collapse using very sophisticated numerical studies with supercomputers. You can get these really beautiful pictures. And neutrinos are part of this process. They, of course, interact rarely, but their interactions actually do make some difference into what happens and how the star actually explodes. And this is actually what we can learn about if we can detect those neutrinos. Okay, it's actually happened once in relatively recent times. In 1987, there was actually a very famous core collapse supernova that happened in the Large Magellanic Cloud, which is a small galaxy which is outside of our own galaxy. The distance was 55 kiloparsec. Our galaxy is about 20 kiloparsecs across, and the center of the galaxy is about 10 kiloparsecs from us, a little bit less than 10 kiloparsecs. And so this was kind of just outside our own Milky Way galaxy, relatively close. But this supernova happened, and it was a type 2, and it created a huge burst of neutrinos, and actually there were 2 detectors, smaller than the ones that we have running right now, but those detectors, between them, detected about 24 neutrinos. And so this was an amazing event, and the fact that there were neutrinos detected really kind of confirmed the basic picture that we have for what's going on during a core collapse supernova. But of course, 24 is not enough. We want to see more neutrinos. Now, how often can we expect this to happen? Now, core collapse supernovae are not very common on the scale of a human lifetime or a graduate student lifetime. I actually did core collapse supernovae for my thesis, and I graduated anyway, even though the one didn't occur during the time I was a grad student, which is a good thing. But how often do we expect them? So here's our Milky Way. This is where we live here. This is the Andromeda Galaxy. If you've been outside on a clear night, it's actually very easy to see the Andromeda Galaxy. So this is about 700 kiloparsecs away. And this circle that I've drawn here, you imagine it as a sphere, is maybe a couple hundred kiloparsecs. And it's within about this radius, we expect maybe 1 or so supernovae every several decades, okay, so every 30 years or so. So this doesn't happen very often. And actually, I have to say this kind of sometimes causes a little tension in that people don't want to build detectors for which the only goal is a supernova. They have to have some other kind of day job. And I'll say a little bit more about that. And this is something where I also think that, okay, maybe I don't want to wait my whole career for a supernova, but on the other hand, if it's so rare that we have to be prepared to gather all possible information that we can. We have to have our detectors ready to not miss it. We better not miss it if one happens. It's only going to give you a burst over 10 seconds, or maybe a few tenths of seconds, and we really have to be ready to get whatever information we can get. Okay, what are we going to learn? I won't talk about all these things in details, but it's an enormous amount of science that we will get from the next supernova burst that we can observe in detail. We can learn about what's going on in the core collapse. How does the explosion happen? What happens to the neutron star? Actually, a really cool thing that we would see is if a black hole forms from the neutron star, what we would see is we'd see a really bright flash of neutrinos that would sharply cut off after about 2 seconds. So you'd see a bright burst and then bam, nothing. Whereas if a neutron star forms, you just see a more gentle tail off. And so this is something which this would be the kind of dream. You could actually see the black hole being born in real time in the neutrino signal. You can learn about how elements are formed. You can actually also I'm actually really a particle physicist by training rather than an astrophysicist, and I'm actually very excited by the fact that we could learn about neutrino properties as well from the neutrinos. And there's also many other things that this is kind of a virtuous circle. If you can measure the neutrinos, you can learn these things, but if you get information from other messengers, from the photons that you see the supernova, from gravitational waves as well, then you can do a better job of learning about the neutrinos. And furthermore, the more we know about neutrinos from terrestrial experiments, which I'm also deeply involved in, the better we'll be able to learn about the astrophysics. So the more information, the better. And one more thing, which I'm going to come back to, is that the neutrinos are prompt. They come out right away. They come out within, you see them within 10 seconds, whereas the light from the supernova, because it takes time for the shock wave and for the photons to actually get out of the collapsing, the big bunch of material there, that can be a delay of hours, maybe even days. And so if you can see the neutrino burst, we can tell astronomers that there is something that has happened and they better go look for a supernova, and I'll come back to that. Okay, so how do we detect the neutrinos? There's actually a bunch of different types of detectors that are made out of different materials. Some of them are made out of water, either liquid or ice water. There are detectors that are made of liquid noble gases, so liquid argon in particular. There's also detectors made of hydrocarbon, which emits light that's called scintillator, and there's a bunch of others as well. And as I mentioned before, most of these detectors are not designed and built specifically for supernova neutrinos. And the reason for that is because a lot of, you don't want to build a very expensive detector when you may get nothing in 30 years. You know, you may actually not see a supernova because they don't happen often enough nearby. And so a lot of these detectors actually have day jobs. Their main purpose, their main science purpose is to study neutrinos for some other reason, for example, to look at flavor change and fundamental properties of neutrinos. And a lot of these experiments also have beams where there's artificial beams of neutrinos that are sent to detectors. And that's a whole other interesting story, but that's kind of the reason that these detectors are built. It's not primarily for supernova neutrinos, although they are great supernova neutrino detectors. So I'll say a little bit about different kinds of detectors. Detectors can be made of water. And the reason for that is you can get very big detectors. Water is very cheap, so you can make a very big detector. And water is a medium in which a charged particle that's made by a neutrino will make a kind of shock wave of light called a Cherenkov ring, or called Cherenkov light, that can then be picked up in very sensitive photon sensors. So it makes light in a ring shape that you can then pick up. This is kind of radiation, it's like a shock wave of light. So this is actually a picture of a fighter jet with a sonic boom. It's kind of like a sonic boom of light that is produced. And if you've ever seen pictures of nuclear reactors glowing blue, that's where the light is coming from. It's charged particles from radioactivity that's creating Cherenkov light that makes a kind of blue glow around reactors. And of course, the detector, we put very sensitive photon detectors to pick up this Cherenkov light and kind of make an image of the particles that are made by the neutrino. Now this experiment, called Super K, is one that I'm actually still involved in. I worked on for many years. This is a gigantic underground detector. It's 40 meters high. It's about 17 meters radius, and it has 13,000 very sensitive light detectors on its inner surface to image the Cherenkov rings that come from the neutrinos. And it's about 1 kilometer underground. You just drive there. This is actually where we eat lunch, right here. And this detector, this is what it looks like. This is a famous picture. These are the photosensors. They're about that big. This is cleaning them before the first run of Super K. I think this was about 1996. They're actually very beautiful. And if a supernova goes off at the galactic center, Super K will see about 10,000 neutrinos. It will be a huge burst, all in about 10 seconds. And here's a little animation here. This is kind of a projection. This is an unrolled view of the scintillator, and each of these dots is one photosensor. It's one of those big meter scale tube-like things. If this animation can go here, you can see what it will look. Oops. Go back. Get the animation there. Yeah, so this is what it will look like in real time. The whole detector will light up like a Christmas tree in real time, and you will see this burst of, you can't really tell it's rings there, but it's a whole bunch of little Cherenkov rings, and it will be extremely obvious if a supernova goes off in the galaxy. We'll get this enormous bright burst of neutrinos, and it will last maybe 10 or 20 seconds. So this is what we're looking for. This is what we want to see, is this burst of neutrinos. And one thing that's also kind of interesting here is that electrons get kicked. Electrons are light. In electrons in atom, if a neutrino kicks one, the electron will remember the direction it was kicked in, and in fact, that will tell us where the supernova is going to show up on the sky, because some of those rings are pointing away from the supernova, and we'll be able to figure out where it is. From the burst of neutrinos itself, we'll be able to tell astronomers, hey, go look over in that area on the sky, and so they will be able to see where a supernova might appear. Now, there's another, so that was Super Kamiokande. The next generation is called Hyper Kamiokande. This is actually about 8 times Super K in size. It's actually under construction now, and there will be about 80,000 neutrinos if there's a supernova at the galactic center. So this will be very exciting. When this turns on, it will be an enormous burst of neutrinos that will be visible in this very big detector. There's also another kind of water detector. This is called, I call them long-string water Cherenkov detectors. This is a detector called Ice Cube. There's actually one similar in the Mediterranean as well. This is solid water, and this has very long strings of light sensors that are deployed in the ice, and those are actually designed not primarily to look for supernova neutrinos, but to look for very, very high energy neutrinos that make enormous Cherenkov coverings. And this is a picture, this is a kilometer cube scale in the ice at the South Pole. You get these very, very huge bright showers. But you can also see a burst of supernova neutrinos by seeing the whole ice glow over about 10 seconds. And these photosensors can pick up even single photons to give you a picture of the entire burst from this blue glow of the ice that will happen during a supernova. And so this would be really, really interesting to see. I mentioned scintillation detectors. These are detectors made out of oil, basically, hydrocarbon. And this is, they're materials that when particles go through it, they emit flashes of light that are then picked up in phototubes, very sensitive light sensors, like this, very similar to the ones for the Cherenkov detectors. And there's actually a whole bunch of these current detectors. This is a very big one that's just started operation in China called Juno. There's actually a bunch of other ones that are maybe about a kiloton of hydrocarbon. And these have other day jobs. They're looking, for example, at solar neutrinos, at neutrinos from nuclear reactors. And so there's a whole bunch of these that will also see a very bright burst of supernova neutrinos within 10 seconds if there's a supernova that goes off. Now, this is actually a kind of detector I've been working on recently. This is a detectors that are called liquid argon time projection chambers, actually. And these are really, really interesting because you can see when a particle interacts, you get a spray of particles, and you can actually see the tracks of those particles in very great detail. It's like getting a very precise picture of exactly what the neutrino did to the matter. And this is, and whereas, the Cherenkov ring, it's actually kind of a blurry ring. It's hard to figure out what's going on. These are very attractive because you can get very fine-grained tracks. This is there's several smaller ones. These are sort of kiloton scale or sub-kiloton scale. There's now underway in the US. This is actually a big US flagship project called DUNE, or Deep Underground Neutrino Experiment. And actually this one has a day job also with a beam, where there's a beam from Fermilab that is sent 1,300 kilometers through the Earth to South Dakota. And actually the purpose of that is to study the properties of neutrinos, to study flavor change of neutrinos. But this detector is also an awesome supernova detector. It's actually will see thousands of neutrinos from a Milky Way supernova, and it's 40 kilotons or so of argon. And this is really something that I'm all very excited about because there's really very fine-grained information that you can learn. And here's just an example. This is actually not DUNE, but this is one of the smaller ones. You can see you get these very, very rich information in these tracks. It's not just a big ring, it's a whole lot of information about what comes out. And this is what the detector looks like. It's a very deep underground refurbished mine, a mine turned into a laboratory in South Dakota. And the total, it's only about 40 kilotons of it will be useful, but there's these giant chambers of argon that will be deployed to look for neutrinos. And if a supernova happens, we will record a very beautiful sample of neutrinos. And I just want to mention here, we've got these future large detectors. I mentioned some of them. There's Hyper-K, which is 260 kilotons of water. It's about 8 times Super-K. Super-K is 22 kilotons of water. Juno in China is 20 kilotons of scintillator hydrocarbon, and then DUNE is 40 kilotons of argon. But these are not in competition with each other. The situation of a supernova is that we want all the information we can possibly get, and these actually see different neutrino types. So these actually, because they have protons in them, free protons, this is water and this is hydrocarbon, these see mostly actually antineutrinos. These see neutrinos of electron flavor, and so they actually see different parts of the supernova. So basically the flux of supernova from the supernova has different flavors in it, and they see different types. And we want all of those flavors. We want all the information, all of these detectors. Some of the other science that is being done with Hyper-K and DUNE, it's a kind of a competition to see who can do the same science fastest and best. There's complementarities, but it's a bit of a friendly competition. But for supernova neutrinos, the more information you have, the better it is. It's all very complementary. We want all of it. Okay, and this brings me to the last topic I'm going to go into in detail, which is the supernova early warning system. And so this is a network of neutrino detectors around the world. This is a somewhat out-of-date plot, but this is one of the original group of detectors that are part of CNAS. We pronounce it CNAS, Supernova Early Warning System. And the idea here is that if these detectors see the burst in real time, on the time scale that it comes out, which is 10 seconds or so, if they see bursts all at the same time, then we know that something is up. Okay, that's not going to happen randomly. And so we have this network of detectors, all of which are looking through their data streams all the time to see if they see something that looks like a burst of neutrinos. And if they find something, they send it to a message, a datagram to a central computer, and that computer will look at the timestamps and decide if there's a coincidence, if they're all happening at the same time. And if it sees a whole bunch of bursts happening at the same time, the computer will automatically send out an alert to the astronomical community. And so this is called CNAS. This has actually been in operation since about 2005. There have been no nearby supernovae since that time. What is underway now, and this is also another connection to local CESI work on argon detectors, and including DUNE and some other detectors here, there's actually a current big effort to upgrade this effort to a improved latency, improved performance, and there's actually a lot more detectors worldwide, including actually some whose day job is searching for dark matter, not with a primary day job of neutrinos. And so there's really now a much broader and wider community of experimentalists around the whole world, in fact, aiming to see this burst of supernova neutrinos. And so we have CNAS 2.0. In fact, you can join the alert list. In fact, this is something where there's actually connections to amateur astronomers who actually may be among the first to see that supernova that shows up. Anybody can sign up for this list. So I encourage anybody interested to do that. So you can be in the first mailing. Okay, and the neutrinos are coming. They are definitely coming. The Milky Way, the far side of the Milky Way, is about 750 light centuries away. And what that means is that in that time, if we have a few supernovae per century, about 2,000 core collapses have happened already, and the neutrinos are on their way to us. And so here, this is actually a picture from Sky and Telescope. This is us right here. These crosses here, the black one crosses here, are the locations of the historically observed supernovae. And you can see they're all nearby. There's actually a whole Milky Way full of supernovae that actually might be hard to see because there's dust in the way. And these aren't, however, visible easily with neutrinos, and actually modern astronomical instruments will also be able to see them using different wavelengths. And so we've got all of these neutrinos that are coming our way that we will eventually be able to see. Of course, it will take 650 centuries for them all to get here, but they're definitely on their way. Just a side note here, you may remember from the news some years ago, sometimes this pops up every so often, Betelgeuse is a star on the shoulder of Orion. It's a visibly red star. It's a red supergiant, and it's quite nearby. It's actually 180 parsecs, and that's quite close to us. And it has recently, occasionally it decides it gets a little bit dimmer or brighter. It kind of fluctuates its luminosity, and people have often looked at that and thought, ooh, is it about to go off? Is it about to explode? This is the kind of very giant star that could go off any day. It could supernova any day. And unfortunately, it seems like that fluctuation of luminosity probably has nothing to do with what's going on in the core, but it will go off at some point, sometime during the next 100,000 years or so. And when it does, and it could be tomorrow, it could be 100,000 years from now, but when it does, about 25 million neutrinos would be seen in Super K. It would be a really, really enormous burst. And if it is tomorrow, we will, in fact, be ready to gather those neutrinos and get all the information. I would like the supernova to just hold it in until we have all the big detectors on, but we'll have to see for that. Okay, so just to summarize, the sky from underground. The next neutron star or a black hole birth in the Milky Way, it will be heralded by this extremely bright, brilliant 10-second flash of neutrinos, and we have these vast underground vats of material that are ready to see them. You can be among the first to know. So this is Dorothy looking for a supernova. And the future detectors will have both a bigger and a richer signal, also many messengers, including gravitational waves. And here's Dorothy opening the world to a world of color. The neutrinos are definitely coming. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to take questions. And I can't see anybody, so.
Could we bring up the lights, please? We have time for a few minutes. We'll have microphones in the 2 aisles. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I see one here, and wait for the microphone to come.
So a question about supernova early warning system is when that alert eventually goes off, will it provide information about the direction or general location of the supernova? And if so, how do you determine where the supernova is?
Oh, that's a great question. That's actually something I'm personally spending a lot of time on. So we hope, this is our aim. In fact, SNOOS 2.0, we have actually quite, our goal is to significantly improve the pointing from the supernova. So there's actually several ways, and probably the best way is actually to use the neutrinos themselves. So like the electron that's kicked gives you a cone of Cherenkov light, for example, that's forward. Actually, in Dune, you can do very interesting things. In fact, we can actually show we can point to maybe a few degrees on the sky with a detector like Dune. You can actually also use the relative timing of the signals to do a triangulation. So that's actually something that's maybe not as good as the individual, using the neutrino interactions themselves. But if you look at the relative timing, then you can exclude areas of the sky and also put in information from there's actually other information that you can use as well. So it's a very interesting thing. And we would expect for something at the center of the galaxy, we could probably, or at the distance of the center of the galaxy, point to several degrees, which is, some astronomers would laugh at that. Actually, they used to laugh at us, but now because of gravitational waves, which regularly doesn't have that, has a relatively broad bands, now the astronomers don't laugh at us anymore, and they're.
I see a question in the middle.
The detectors are expensive, yeah.
My question is this. Given there's a lot of competition for science money, I applaud you for your patience over 30 years of waiting. How do you convince anyone to spend this kind of money on something that maybe happens once a year? Maybe you'll have 10 seconds. How do you convince them?
So we actually don't usually succeed for supernova. In fact, not even just the public, the other scientists, the neutrino community. And that's why pretty much all of these detectors, in fact, I think with maybe one exception, I think there might be one exception of a very small dedicated detector made of lead, which is very inexpensive. All of the detectors have day jobs. They all exist for other science purposes, either for studying neutrino oscillations, basically the fundamental properties of neutrinos, sometimes then coupled with a beam of neutrinos. Sometimes it's looking at natural neutrinos, and some of them are looking for dark matter, or actually their main purpose in life is actually the search for dark matter. And so that some of these are in that category over here. And so almost all of these detectors, I think the only exception is this one called HALO, are multi-purpose detectors that actually go for lots of different science topics and have a very broad and rich science program. So they're expensive, but you get a lot of things for your money.
Thank you.
See a question? Yes.
So thank you for that lecture. That was incredibly interesting. I had a question about one of your slides. You had a slide where there were parts of the Milky Way that were circled where you could detect, that one, where you could detect where neutrinos were coming from. How do you come to that conclusion, and how do you know where in the Milky Way and of what range neutrinos are coming from?
Oh, so that's a great question. This was I was just trying to indicate that there are neutrinos that have historically happened in the wavefront of the neutrinos. So if this okay, this might be a few thousand, thousands of light years, for example. If the supernova happened thousands of light years ago, the wavefront of neutrinos would be at this circle. I was just trying to show that. But it's a very good question. How do we know where the supernova happened? And in fact, we would like to do that very quickly because we'd like to be able to tell astronomers where to look. Now, if there's a subsequent supernova, it will be very obvious. There will be a bright supernova and the astronomers can say, oh, it's right there. It actually could happen, and actually this might be very interesting, it could happen that if a black hole is formed, there won't be a bright supernova. And in fact, then the hunt for a missing star will be on. And that's actually something that could happen. What that would appear is that a star would be there, probably a heavy star that, a big one that would be likely to collapse, and it will wink out when the core collapses, if it makes a black hole. And so that is something that would be a really interesting astronomical event. If we could actually see a star disappear in coincidence with the neutrinos, and as I think I answered a question before, we can use the neutrinos themselves to help narrow down where the supernova might have happened, where the core collapse might have happened. But yeah, no, that's finding the supernova both quickly. In fact, you want to find it very early if possible if you're an astronomer, because there can be very interesting early effects. But even finding the non-supernova, if a black hole formed, is also a very interesting thing to do.
I see a question right here.
Oh, that is a great question. No. I mean, if something goes inside the event horizon. Oh, the question was, can neutrinos go through black holes? I think that was the question. And the answer is no. They basically will behave like photons interacting with the black holes, is that if something goes into the event horizon, it's not coming out. It can't escape. So they cannot go through black holes. Yeah, and they're not special, and no particles can. Yeah. A grouping toward, in this example of the pointing, I think that was just a random example. There was nothing, so this one here? Yes, so this is just an example, like imagine this was a example, suppose the supernova's right here on the sky, then you would get this excess of scatterers that are pointing, that are gathering around that position. Oh, well, the actual position would be opposite in the opposite direction, but it would actually be somewhere over here on the sky. But yeah, this was just a randomly chosen example of a direction.
Okay. Quick question. If there was a supernova that an argon detector dune was alive, would you see the tracks all in parallel? All the neutrinos coming would follow us, be in parallel?
Not exactly. We would see excesses in some direction. It would actually be like this. Actually, you would have some neutrinos that scattered on electrons, and so you get an excess like this. But actually, most of the neutrino interactions that happen in argon create an electron that doesn't remember the direction of the neutrino. So it would just be pointing in random directions. Actually, that's like these green ones over here. So it would be a mix of some that pointed sort of forward, not exactly parallel, but kind of in a cone forward, and then a bunch of them that were just pointing randomly in every direction.
Hello. Thank you for the lecture. It was profoundly interesting. Right here.
Okay.
One question I have about the actual detectors themselves is when we're talking about like limitations of these neutrino detectors, is the biggest limitation that we're facing right now like a fundamental physics and like a physics limitation of like the laws of physics are constraining our ability to detect, an engineering thing that we know it can be done, but we don't know quite how to do it yet, or just an economics thing of like no one's chosen to write a deep enough check for it?
All of those.
All of
yeah,
those?
yeah. I mean, you're fighting the fundamental interaction rate. You know, that's basically physics that tells you how many neutrinos will interact with a given material of a given size. There's also, the fundamental physics tells you what stuff is going to come out of the interaction. And now how well you can detect the stuff that comes out of the interaction depends on the engineering. And the different detectors have, you know, very different engineering problems. Some common problems is they have to have relatively low background. They have to have, you know, you have to have good energy resolution. You have to be able to see the tracks very well. So these are sort of similar kinds of problems. But the specific problems depend on the detector type. And then for the economics, yes, I mean, roughly the cost scales with the size of the detector. You want the detector to be as big as possible, and then it just gets very expensive to make it really, really big. And you know, you just want more material to stop as many neutrinos as you can, and that's really limited by cost.
Where do you get the 40,000 tons of argon from?
The air. Yeah, actually, I mean, Dune will purchase it, but argon is a fairly common component, relatively common component of air, so it gets condensed out of air. There's actually, I think there's people here who are knowledgeable about this, that we actually would like to have argon. We haven't figured out how to do this cheaply enough yet, really, but we would like to have argon that's has very little radioactivity in it. And such argon is available if you get it from deep underground, because it hasn't had cosmic rays that are making it radioactive, that are generating, that are breaking apart nuclei and making it slightly radioactive. So there are sources of very low background argon that are very clean, low radioactivity argon, but that's very expensive to extract and purify. And for 40 kilotons, at the moment, it's not feasible to use it, but it would be really nice if we could have such a thing.
Do we know if neutrinos interact with each other?
Oh, that's a very interesting question that actually is very relevant to supernovae. So yes, they should interact with each other. If the density of neutrinos is high enough, they will actually have a probability of interacting with each other. And in fact, in supernovae, for a short period of time, the density is high enough for neutrinos to interact with each other, and actually that creates a lot of very interesting effects, which I didn't really have time to go into, but that is the effects of neutrino-neutrino interactions, which is a mind-boggling thing, is potentially observable in the supernova signal as well, that would actually change the flavors of the neutrinos as a function of time and energy. That is something that we could measure. So that is actually a very interesting physics thing that we would like to do with the supernova signal.
I was wondering exactly what type of information are you hoping to receive from these neutrinos, from these stars? What information that really excites you here?
Yeah, so what we can learn is the energy of the neutrino, which we learn from the product of the interaction that it makes. The flavor of the neutrino, there's 3 flavors in antineutrinos, so we would like to know that. And then the time within the burst, the time structure of the burst. And so those are the observables that we can get at. And all of these we can, of course, detectors are imperfect, but all of these detectors that I talked about can get at some of that information. So we want as much of that information with as precise measurement as we possibly can, and as many neutrinos as we possibly can.
So my question is actually about neutron stars over here. So you said that a neutron star, when it's collapsed, gets about 10 kilometers. When that neutron star then collapses again and becomes a black hole, does it retain that mass? And if so, how does a black hole grow in size?
I believe so, yes. And I'm not a black hole expert. I think there's actually probably people in the audience who are, but the answer is yes. I mean, there will be radiation as well, but I think.
Yeah. I had a quick question. What motivates the shape of the detectors, like the water-based as well as the other detectors, like the cylindrical shape. What motivates that exactly?
Oh, what is motivating that? So the cylindrical shape, I think, is just, it's engineering. I think it's just strength of the structure. I think that's a very robust structure. Spherical is actually better for the point of view of using the information to determine properties of the neutrinos because it's symmetric. So actually, ideally, you would like the detectors really to be spherical, but the engineering is more difficult. But some of them do manage it. Yeah.
Okay, and follow up. It's like the depth of what you see as the charged particles. It does matter, right? The depth of the detector as well. Like you're ideally like a bigger detector. So.
Yes, so you would ideally like to be as deep as possible because the cosmic rays, the deeper you are, the lower the cosmic ray flux. Once you get to be a kilometer or so, it's pretty good. And actually, you kind of have an advantage for supernova compared to some other neutrinos. Like solar neutrinos sort of come in one at a time. They're just a steady flow of neutrinos from the sun. And there, you really care about the background coming from cosmic rays or whatever stuff. Supernova, they're all coming at one burst. Okay, so you actually have an advantage in rejecting background because you know what the background is because you measure it away from the burst, and it tends to be less important because you have this really high rate and then just a burst. And in fact, some detectors, even detectors on the surface, can do something. They do have a lot of background, but they can measure something. They may get some information from a supernova burst even though there's background there.
Sure. Thank you. Great talk, by the way. Thank you.
Stupid question. If the neutrinos are negative, they have no charge, as the word says. So what do they get attracted to?
It's not necessarily an attraction or repulsion. It's basically just it's a weak interaction, which is it's exchange of a virtual boson with matter. And this is actually one of the standard model interactions, which is actually quite, there's a very robust theory for describing them. And so there's a exchange of a virtual particle, which can be either a neutral massive, it's a massive particle that's exchanged, either a neutral Z particle or a W boson. Those are both both massive particles. And actually, because those particles are massive is partly why that's why the interaction's weak. It's not necessarily attraction or repulsion. The interaction isn't. It's a separate kind of charge. Maybe I could put it this way: that there's a weak charge. Matter has something that's maybe you can consider it. You can consider it analogous to electric charge. That is gives it its weak interaction attraction, if you want to think of it that way.
How will they be beneficial to mankind?
How what, sorry?
How would they be beneficial to mankind?
Beneficial to?
To mankind.
How will this, okay, well, I would say for the most part we don't know yet, in the same way that when the electron was discovered, nobody had any clue what the benefit to mankind would be. But there are actually some near-term applications of neutrinos. One example is you can look at the neutrinos from nuclear reactors to monitor from an external position, so nuclear reactors in fission reactions actually produce enormous amounts of neutrinos. We can detect those neutrinos so you can actually tell from the neutrinos what's going on in the reactor, whether it's even what kind of fuel it has, whether it's really running. And so there's actually an application for nuclear nonproliferation because you can monitor whether there's something breeding going on in the reactor using the neutrinos. So that's one application. There's some other applications looking at nuclear spent fuel, that kind of thing. So it's not a very broad array of applications, but there are some. But I would say we just don't know yet because it's fundamental science that it's just very hard to predict how that understanding will influence future benefits.
Thank you.
Hello, over here, in the middle.
I can't.
Right in the middle. Okay, hello. I wanted to ask, what about pulsar neutron stars? Since they're giving off bursts of energy periodically, pulsar neutron stars.
Yep.
I wanted to ask if we could measure neutrinos from those as well.
Actually, that's interesting. So after the neutron star is formed, it very slowly cools, and it actually does emit some neutrinos while it's cooling, actually over its entire lifetime. But the flux and energies of those neutrinos are so low that it's not really feasible for us to detect them. I mean, maybe possibly if we were very, very close, but it's just not enough neutrinos, and they're also very low energy neutrinos.
Okay, and then one more. You said gravitational waves are also an indication of neutrinos. What about mergers with neutron stars or even black holes? Do
Yes.
those also emit high amounts of neutrinos? And because of
Yes.
that, do we connect LIGO and all these neutrino detectors?
Yes. So in fact, for mergers, we do expect neutrinos actually from some of the same production mechanisms. It's a kind of thermal production mechanism. Neutrinos of all flavors, and actually similar energies to supernova burst neutrinos and similar magnitude. So we could detect those if they were nearby. But the problem is that mergers, supernovae are very rare in our galaxy. They only happen every several decades. Mergers happen even less often. So the mergers that are seen in gravitational waves are actually extragalactic. They're actually very distant, and because gravitational wave detectors are actually sensitive to much farther distances than our neutrino detectors. And so if we were lucky enough to have a merger in the Milky Way or nearby, we might be able to see the neutrinos from it. But most of the mergers that are detected in gravitational waves are just too far away to give enough neutrinos for us to actually see.
Great talk. How do we know how the different flavors of neutrino are different from each other? Like, do they have a different interaction?
Yes, they do. And in fact, one of those two kinds of weak interactions, the one that has a W boson, the charged particles that come out are the same flavor as the neutrino. So if it's an electron neutrino, you get an electron coming out. If it's a muon neutrino, you get a muon coming out. The interaction that has a neutral Z boson as the mediator doesn't care about the flavor to a very good approximation. And so if you can measure, and actually this is important for supernova neutrinos because if you're going to have an interaction called a charge current with the W boson that depends on the flavor, you have to have, because mass energy is conserved, you have to have enough energy to actually create a new particle, to turn the energy into the mass of the particle, rest mass of the particle. And so if you're a muon neutrino actually needs about 100 times more energy than an electron neutrino to actually create. It takes 100 times more energy to create a muon than an electron. And most supernova neutrinos don't have enough energy to make muons or tau particles, which need even more energy. And so the only flavor interactions we see are the electron neutrinos and the electron antineutrinos. And actually that has a pretty big impact on the signal.
Interesting, thank you.
Okay, we have time for maybe one or two final questions.
This is.
So, question: as computers get better at number crunching and big data and everything, is there any chance we could put detectors on the surface, or would it? Just
Yeah. We could. In fact, there are some where you can get some information. And examples are actually some of the fine-grained detectors like the liquid argon TPC detectors. There are some detectors on the surface where I think there's actually a reasonable hope you could extract. You could do a precision data analysis and get a reasonable sample. So it's not impossible.
Hi, I just wanted to ask. I've worked with photomultiplier tubes before at the Cosmology division in Armenia, and so when you showed on I forgot what slide, but it had over like 13,000 photomultiplier tubes.
Yep.
In I forgot what place you showed, but that just blew me away. And I just wanted to ask, why that many photomultiplier tubes, and what type of photomultiplier tubes are they?
They are manufactured by Hamamatsu. They are 20-inch tubes. They're quite big, 20-inch radius, and they are well, we want as many as possible. Because the more phototubes, the more coverage you have of this inner surface of the detector with a photosensitive material, the better job you do in the detection. You get more light and therefore better information about the neutrinos. And so it's basically cost. Basically when you're designing these detectors, you try to get as much photo coverage as you can for the funds that you have. And so that's what's driven the number of those neutrinos. And it is actually nicer to make them smaller for more fine-grained resolution, but there's some, there's cost that's more expensive to have lots of, many more channels. I don't know if that answered your question.
Thank you. It did.
Okay, we'll do one more question.
You got a great slide there. Fantastic. If an element is electron, a little cupcake is a neutrino. Looking at this slide, it says that the electron will know the direction. How is an electron possible to predict direction? But regardless, how are we able to
The direction of the electron?
based on a neutrino action?
Oh, so this is actually one of the it's a very clean prediction of the standard model, actually. What the distribution, if a neutrino is interacting with an electron, that's actually a very clean interaction and very well understood, and we know exactly what the distribution of directions you're going to get and with what probability and with what energy. So we actually know it very well. This is not, and that's not true for all interactions. Interactions with nuclei are actually much less well understood because nuclei are big, messy, goopy places. But electrons are very simple and clean, and we do understand that very well.
Okay, I'm afraid we are out of time, so we'll end the official Q&A here, but Professor Scholberg will be available in the front for a few minutes for further questions. Thank you very much for coming, and let's thank Professor Scholberg again.
Thanks for the great questions.